Alright, example number 1, we're going to take these two rational expressions and subtract them. However, before I can subtract these two rational expressions, the first thing I'm going to need to do is find the least common denominator. So as discussed earlier, what I'm going to do is take the two denominators, which are x plus 6 and x squared minus 36, and I'm going to come over here and factor those. So x plus 6 can't be factored, so I'll leave it as x plus 6. X squared minus 36, I'm going to use difference of squares to factor this. We know that the square root of x squared is x, the square root of 36 is 6. We have one of the factors with a plus and another factor with a minus. So the factors of x squared minus 36 are x plus 6 and x minus 6. Now notice we do have some common factors here, so that's going to be part of my least common denominator. We also have this x minus 6 that we need to include as part of the least common denominator. So both of these factors make up my least common denominator. So x plus 6 and x minus 6 are my least common denominator. So what I'm going to do is write both of these fractions with the least common denominator, x plus 6 and x minus 6. X plus 6 and x minus 6. Now if we take a look at this first fraction, you notice we've got the x plus 6. And that's already in my denominator. What I don't have is that x minus 6. So what I'm going to need to do is take that numerator 3x and multiply it with a x minus 6. Because just like with other fractions, whatever I do to the bottom, I've also got to do to the top. So if I'm multiplying the bottom, my denominator, by x minus 6, I've also got to multiply my numerator by x minus 6. And I'll go ahead and do that multiplying here in a second. If I take a look at that second rational expression, x squared minus 36, well, x squared minus 36 turns out to be x plus 6 and x minus 6 in its factored form. Therefore, I've got both of those factors already, so that numerator is going to stay 2x. Don't need to multiply by anything there. Alright, so what I'm going to do next is go ahead and multiply the 3x times the x, which would give me a 3x squared. And then I'm going to multiply 3x times that negative 6, which would give me a negative 18x. Now I'm going to leave that denominator in its factored form. I'm going to leave it as x plus 6 and x minus 6. Minus, again, we didn't have to multiply anything over here. That 2x is going to stay 2x. At this point, since I've got common denominators, now I can go ahead and subtract my numerators. That 3x squared, we're not taking anything away from it, so we'll leave it 3x squared. I've got a negative 18x, and I'm going to subtract 2x. So a negative 18x minus a 2x would be a negative 20x. Remember, don't try and subtract the denominators. It's only the numerators that we're subtracting. So the denominator is going to stay in that factored form, x plus 6 and x minus 6. Now we could go ahead and leave that in its factor form, or we could go ahead and go through FOIL and multiply that out. But in this case, we're going to leave it in its factored form. So when I subtract those two rational expressions, this is the answer. 3x squared minus 20x all over x plus 6 times x minus 6. Alright, example number 2, we're going to be adding these two rational expressions. However, before I can add, I've got to have common denominators, and at this point I don't have those common denominators yet. So what I'm going to do first is going to go ahead and take those two denominators and rewrite them in its factored form. So in other words, x squared minus 5x plus 6, I'm going to rewrite that so that it's in its factored form. We know that an x times an x will give me the x squared. What I need are some factors of 6 that are going to also add up to a negative 5. In this case, that's going to be a negative 3 and a negative 2. Notice how negative 3 times negative 2 give me the 6, and a negative 3 plus a negative 2 add up to a negative 5. I'm going to do the same thing with this other denominator. X squared minus 2x minus 3 needs to be factored. Alright, so let's go ahead and factor x squared minus 2x minus 3. Notice how we have a trinomial with a leading coefficient of 1. So we're looking for the factors. We know that an x times another x will give me the x squared. I need some factors of negative 3 that are also going to add up to a negative 2. In this case, those two numbers are negative 3 and positive 1. Notice how negative 3 times 1 is negative 3, and a negative 3 plus 1 adds up to a negative 2. So at this point, I've taken my two denominators and I've factored them completely. What I'm going to do is go ahead and find my least common denominator. Now at this point, we've already taken that first denominator, x squared minus 5x plus 6, and we found the factors to be x minus 3 and x minus 2. We've also taken that second denominator, x squared minus 2x minus 3, and we found the factors to be x minus 3 and x plus 1. Now, the least common denominator. We notice that we have some like factors, x minus 3, so that's going to be part of my least common denominator. However, we also need to include x minus 2 and x plus 1 as part of that least common denominator. So all three of these factors are what I'm calling my least common denominator. So I'm going to rewrite these so that I'm using x minus 3, x minus 2, and x plus 1 as the least common denominator. So let me go ahead and do that. X minus 3, x minus 2, and x plus 1. Now, of course, we're going to have to rewrite this here in a second. The other denominator is the same thing, x minus 3, x minus 2, and x plus 1. Alright, so you'll notice that over here, we've got an x minus 4 for my numerator. But as we mentioned earlier, whatever I do to the bottom, I've also got to do to the top. So notice that I've got the x minus 3 and x minus 3. Notice I've got the x minus 2, the x minus 2. What I don't have is this x plus 1. So I'm going to need to multiply my numerator by an x plus 1. Because again, whatever I do to the bottom, I've got to do to the top. Now I'm going to that second fraction. The numerator I have right now is 2x. But again, if you look over here, I've got the x minus 3, the x minus 3. I've got the x plus 1 and the x plus 1. But what I don't have, is this x minus 2. So I'm going to have to multiply this top here by x. Oops. Going to have to multiply that 2x by x minus 2. Alright, so let me give myself some room here. Get rid of this. So if I go ahead and take this x minus 4 and x plus 1 and go ahead and do some distributive property or FOIL, I've got x times x, which is x squared, x times 1, which is 1x, negative 4 times x is a negative 4x, and a negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. I'm going to go ahead and simplify here. If I combine like terms, of 1x minus 4x would now give me a negative 3x. So this now becomes a negative 3x. So I now have x squared minus 3x minus 4. And this is what I get after I do FOIL. Of course, my denominator is still the same, x minus 3, x minus 2, and x plus 1. Notice I'm not multiplying that just yet because I may have to reduce here in a little while. Let me go ahead and go to the other fraction or the other rational expression and multiply this 2x times the x minus 2 using some distributive property. 2x times x is a 2x squared. 2x times a negative 2 would be a negative 4x. Again, that denominator is still the same, x minus 3, x minus 2, and x plus 1. Alright, so now I'm ready to start adding up the numerators. I've got x squared plus 2x squared, which would be a 3x squared. A negative 3x plus a negative 4x would make that a negative 7x. And a negative 4 plus 0 would be a negative 4. So I've just added my numerators. That denominator is still staying the same, x minus 3, x minus 2, and x plus 1. Now again, the reason I'm leaving it in its factor form is because I may be able to reduce this fraction after I add the numerators. So now what I've got to try and do is see if I can factor 3x squared minus 7x minus 4 so that I can see if I can reduce this. So in order to do this, I'm going to have to use my bottoms up. So I'm taking my 3x squared minus 7x minus 4, and I'm going to rewrite that as x squared minus 7x minus 12. I'm looking for factors of negative 12 that are also going to add up to a negative 7. So let's see if we can find some factors of negative 12 that are also going to add up to a negative 7. Well, let's see here. We know that negative 2 times 6 would give me a negative 12. Of course, that wouldn't add up to a negative 7. We also got negative 3 and 4. However, that won't add up to a negative 7. Negative 12 and 1. However, that won't add up to a negative 7. So at this point, it looks like no matter what I try, there are no factors of negative 12 that are going to add up to a negative 7. Therefore, 3x squared minus 7x minus 4 cannot be factored, which means I can't reduce this. So I'm going to leave it in this form right here.